clean it and shut your mouth.
No, no.
That's actually the right height for you, and crawl back to whatever basement they store you in. Your hands belong on trash bags, not billion-dollar contracts. Don't touch that. You people are paid to clean the table, not read what's on it. Don't ever talk unless I say so.
Yes, sir. I won't.
Man, imagine they call her a thief, but she already saw the number that could bury them all. The contract was upside down when she saw it. That was the strange part, the part Renata Bowen Hale would think about later. She wasn't even reading it. She was wiping down the glass table on the 34th floor of Crestway Gulf Logistics at 11:42 on a Tuesday night, and the page was upside down, and the number was wrong anyway. Two numbers, actually. Page 41, one near the top, one buried in a schedule at the bottom. They were supposed to match. They didn't. She stood there with the cloth in her hand, not moving, and somewhere behind her, the elevator chimed. Well, a voice said, this is interesting. Preston Cale came into the boardroom the way he came into every room, like it had been waiting for him. 34 years old, sleeves rolled with intention, a young executive trailing him with 2 coffees, the CEO's son. In 8 hours, at 7 in the morning, his father was going to sign the biggest merger in the company's history at this exact table, and everyone in the building knew Preston had built the deal himself. His deal, his table, his moment, and a cleaner was standing over his contract. I'm sorry, Renata said. I was wiping the table. I'll come back. You'll come back. He smiled at the man beside him, then at her, and the smile lasted a little too long. You were reading it. I was cleaning under it. Steve, was she cleaning under it? Preston didn't wait for an answer. He crossed the room, picked up the page 41 of everything, page 41, and held it up to the light like it might be stained. These are confidential merger documents. Do you know what confidential means? She did. She had spent 11 years of her life reading documents exactly like that one, in rooms exactly like this one, in a different city, in a different life. She had testified about documents like that in a federal courtroom once, with her hand on a Bible and her whole career on the table. But nobody in this building knew that. Nobody in this building had ever looked at her long enough to wonder. Yes, she said, I know what it means. What happened next took 4 minutes, and it happened in front of 6 people. Preston called down for security, not because he needed to, but because the elevator lobby was filling with the night crew coming off break, and an audience changes what some men are willing to do. He walked Renata out of the boardroom with his hand hovering an inch from her shoulder, never touching, steering. He announced in a voice built to carry that documents may have been photographed or tampered with. He used the word tampered 3 times. Walter Greaves, the night supervisor, 61 years old and 3 years from his pension, came up in the freight elevator and stood there with his hands folded and said nothing. And at the elevator bank, in front of Marisol and Deja and the 2 new guys whose names Renata hadn't learned yet, Preston held out his hand. Badge. She looked at Walter. Walter looked at the floor. Renata unclipped the badge from her collar, the badge with the photo where she'd been too tired to smile, 22 months of night shifts old, and set it in Preston Cale's palm without letting her fingers touch his skin. You're suspended pending review, he said. Be grateful it's not the police. The elevator doors closed on her face. He mistook her stillness for fear. Everyone in that lobby did. What none of them knew, what Renata herself was only beginning to admit, riding down 34 floors with her empty collar and her cart left behind, was that she had already memorized the number on page 41. both numbers, and she knew exactly what the gap between them meant because she had seen it before. 6 years ago, the last time she saw it, telling the truth about it burned her whole life to the ground. Here's what nobody at Crestway knew about the woman who emptied their trash cans. Renata Bowen Hale had a forensic accounting license, 11 years at Dunmore and Ash, one of the most respected audit firms in Texas. Her job had been finding exactly this: numbers that didn't match, money that moved sideways, signatures that arrived too fast. She'd been good, better than good. Partners 2 levels up used to bring her files just for a second look, which was office language for something's wrong and I can't see it. Renata could always see it. 6 years ago, she saw it in the wrong place. A client's books, a client worth 8 figures a year to the firm. She flagged it. She followed procedure. She wrote the memo and then a second memo. And then she sat in a conference room while 3 men explained to her kindly, patiently, that she had misread the situation. When she didn't accept that, the explanation stopped being kind. The client stayed, Renata didn't, and the story that followed her out the door, quietly, never in writing, always in phone calls she'd never hear, was that she was difficult, that she made accusations. 11 years, gone in a season. Her licensed sponsorship, gone. Her marriage held on for another year after that, and then it didn't. She still remembered the exact sentence her managing partner used the day he called her into his office for the last time. He hadn't shouted. That was the part that stayed with her longest, how quiet a firing could sound when it was dressed up as concern. He'd folded his hands on the desk, the way men do when they've rehearsed something, and said he admired her thoroughness. He really did. But thoroughness without judgment was just noise. And clients could hear the difference between an accountant and an alarm. Then he'd slid a severance letter across the desk, already signed, dated 2 days before the meeting even happened. She hadn't cried in that office. She'd counted the ceiling tiles instead, 36 of them, 4 rows of 9, and asked if she could keep her chair because it had been a gift from her father when she passed her exam, and the partner had looked almost relieved to say yes. Take the chair, take whatever you need, as if furniture could settle the account. The only thing she'd kept from that life besides the chair was a red editor's pen. Dunmore and Ash used to order them by the box, a specific brand, fine tip, the kind auditors use to circle problems. Hers had a crack down the barrel from the day she cleared out her desk and gripped it too hard in the parking garage. It was clipped inside her cleaning cart right now, 34 floors up. She'd never once asked herself why she still carried it. At 11:58 p.m., Renata sat in her car in the parking structure and did the thing she did when the world got loud. She counted 4 cars on this level, 9 light fixtures, 1 flickering, $212 in checking until Friday. 4 months on the lease at Delary Street, the first apartment in 2 years that was really theirs. No cousin's spare room, no month-to-month with a landlord who wouldn't fix the lock. Theo, her 9-year-old, had painted his own room. Badly. Streaks everywhere. He was so proud of those streaks. He'd started at his new school in the fall, his 3rd school in 3 years, and just last week, he'd finally stopped asking her every morning whether they were staying. "Are we staying, Mama?" "We're staying, baby." Lose this job was suspected of tampering in the file, and no building company in Houston hires her. Lose the paycheck. Lose Delary Street. Lose Delary Street. And she'd have to look her son in the eye and move him a 4th time. That was the math on one side. On the other side was page 41. The purchase adjustment on top said one number. The payment schedule underneath said another, $4.1 million apart. And the gap didn't vanish into a rounding note or an appendix. It flowed in one clean line she could still see when she closed her eyes to something called Kestrel Freight Advisory. Advisory, a consulting fee inside a merger, wedged where a tired lawyer's eyes slide right past at 2 in the morning. She knew the shape of it the way you know a face. She had circled that exact shape in red ink 6 years ago, and the man who built it had walked away clean while she carried the blame out of the building in a cardboard box. Renata put both hands on the steering wheel and said out loud to no one, "It's not my table anymore." The signing was at 7 a.m. She checked the time. 12:04, 6 hours and 56 minutes. She didn't start the car. Because here was the problem. The thing that sat in her chest like a stone. It wasn't just numbers on a page. Money like that doesn't disappear politely. Somebody on the other side of that merger. The smaller company being absorbed, Ellison Marine, 400 employees, half of them dock workers, was going to eat that 4.1 million in ways they wouldn't understand for years. Pensions get restructured. Depots get consolidated. People who load ships for a living get a letter with the word "unfortunately" in the first sentence. She had seen how it ends. Last time, she'd read the bankruptcy coverage 18 months after they pushed her out and recognized her own unheeded memo in every paragraph. Her phone buzzed. Amara, 15 years old, home with Theo, texting past midnight when she had school. "You okay?" Her badge thing pinged offline on the app. Renata typed "fine, system glitch, go to bed," and deleted it. Typed "everything's fine" and deleted that too. Her daughter had a radar for the word fine. 2 years of instability builds that radar in a child, and Renata hated that she'd built it. She sent, "handling something at work, home by breakfast, check the stove and go to sleep, I love you." Then she sat in the dark and let herself think the thought all the way through for the first time in 6 years. You saw it. You can prove it. And the last time you said so, they buried you instead of the crime. Nobody had noticed the cleaner reading the contract until it was useful to notice her. Nobody knew her name in that boardroom tonight. Preston Cale had suspended her without once asking it. That was his first mistake. It would not be his last. At 12:19 a.m., Renata Bowen Hale got out of the car, walked to the parking structure's stairwell, the one place with decent light, pulled an old grocery receipt from her coat pocket, and began writing numbers from memory on the back of it, both figures from page 41, the Kestrel line, the schedule reference. Her hand was steady. That surprised her. What she needed now was impossible in the amount of time she had. Proof she never touched those files. Proof the gap was a pattern and not a typo, and a way to get all of it in front of someone with the power to stop a signature. While she stood on the wrong side of a locked building without a badge, 6 hours before the ink went down. She had done impossible before. It had cost her everything. The question, the one she'd answer before sunrise, one way or the other, was whether she could survive the truth twice. The night crew took their 1 a.m. break in the basement of the tower. In a room with a humming vending machine and a poster about ladder safety that had been peeling off the wall since before Renata was hired. She wasn't supposed to be in the building. That was the first problem she solved, and she solved it the boring way. Marisol badged her through the loading dock entrance without being asked, without a word, the way women who work nights cover for each other. No drama, just a door held open 2 seconds longer than necessary. "You didn't see me," Renata said. "See who?" Marisol said and kept walking. Walter Greaves was waiting in the break room. He'd been waiting, she realized, sitting at the plastic table with 2 cups of coffee, one pushed towards the empty chair, which was as close as Walter ever got to an apology. "Sit down, Renata. I need my cart. Your cart's locked in the 34 storage closet, and you need to sit down." She sat. She didn't touch the coffee. Walter was 61, and he'd worked this building for 19 years. And he had a way of holding his hat in both hands when he was about to say something he didn't believe. He was holding his hat in both hands. "Here's what happens now," he said. "Tomorrow, you write a letter. You say you're sorry. You were confused about the document policy. It won't happen again. You give it to me. I walk it up to HR myself. Mr. Cale's boy gets his apology, feels like a big man, forgets you exist by Friday. In 3 weeks, your badge is back, and this is a story you tell nobody." Walter, "I've seen it go this way a dozen times. Apologies free, Renata. Pride's expensive." He said tampered 3 times in front of the crew. That word goes in a file, and that file follows me to every building in this city. Not if you make it easy for them to drop it. He turned the hat over. "You've got those kids. You've got that new apartment you told Deja about. I've got 22 months to my pension, and I am asking you." And there it was, the real sentence, underneath the fatherly one. I am asking you not to make this a thing I have to pick a side on. The vending machine hummed. Renata looked at this man who had trained her, who covered shifts when Theo's school called, who kept peppermints in his cart pocket for the crew, and she understood that he wasn't wrong, and he wasn't lying, and he wasn't on her side. All three at once. Walter, the merger they're signing at 7, there's a problem in it. His face didn't change. That was the tell. It didn't change at all, the way a face goes still when it's working hard. That, he said slowly, is exactly the kind of sentence that ends with you never working again. You think you saw something. You cleaned a table. I didn't clean tables 11 years ago. It was the first time she'd said anything like it out loud in this building, and she watched it land, watched Walter look at her, actually look, maybe for the first time. Whatever he saw made him stand up and put his hat on. I don't want to know, he said. You hear me? Whatever the story is, I don't want to know it. Write the letter. He stopped at the door and his voice dropped, and for 1 second the fear in it was naked. Please write the letter. Then he was gone, and Renata sat alone with 2 cooling coffees and 6 hours. She thought, they saw the uniform all these months. Even Walter. They missed the woman inside it. Then she stopped thinking it, because feelings weren't going to stop a signature. Evidence was. Proof 1. She never touched those files. This was the accusation, and it had a factual answer, and the answer lived in a machine. Every badge tap in the building logged to a system, and every door on 34 had a reader, and the boardroom itself, she'd cleaned around it 100 times, had a document station with a printer that recorded every copy, every scan, every job with a timestamp. Her badge would show 1 entry to the floor at 11:31 p.m. Her cart's route corner to corner, no print jobs, no scans. She'd carried nothing in but a cloth and nothing out but the trash. The camera in the boardroom's northeast corner. She dusted it weekly. It was real. It worked. Would show her wiping a table and standing still for 90 seconds. 90 seconds of looking. That's all they had on her. And looking, as her old managing partner used to say before he stopped taking her calls, is not a crime. It's the job. The problem was she couldn't pull those logs. Facilities could. Security could. A suspended cleaner with no badge could not. But there was a person who could, and Renata had cleaned her office for 22 months. Here's something people don't understand about night cleaners. They know a building the way doctors know a body. Renata knew who worked late and who pretended to. She knew which executives shredded and which ones just crumpled. She knew that the chief financial officer of Crestway Gulf Logistics, a precise woman named Vivian Achebe, worked past midnight 2 or 3 nights a week, always before big filings, and drank licorice tea and thanked the cleaning staff by name, which put her in a category of 1. And Renata knew, because you can't unsee things when your eyes are trained to see them, that Vivian Achebe's name was on audit sign-offs framed in the lobby, the annual reports displayed like trophies. Renata had dusted those frames. She had read them the way she read everything on autopilot, and some quiet back room of her brain had filed away a detail she'd never had a reason to retrieve. Until tonight, Kestrel Freight Advisory. She'd seen that name before tonight. Not on page 41, before, in the frames, in the fine print of a prior year's audited statements, under vendor relationships, small, clean, signed off. Renata stood in the basement hallway, closed her eyes, and pulled the memory apart the way she used to pull apart a ledger. The lobby frames, left wall, 3 annual reports, this year's and 2 back. Kestrel appeared in... She counted the memory carefully. At least 2 of them. Maybe all 3. A consulting line item, each time just small enough to duck the threshold that triggers extra review. Each time approved in the final week of the fiscal year, when everyone's exhausted and everything's a rush. That wasn't a typo anymore. Once is an error, twice is a habit. 3 years running, sized to slide under review, timed for the rush. That was a pattern. That was proof, too. And it meant tonight's 4.1 million wasn't Preston Cale's first taste. He'd been feeding Kestrel for years, small bites, and the merger was the swallow. The last big transfer before his father handed him the company, and any appetite for looking backward disappeared forever. She opened her eyes, 1:47 a.m., 5 hours, 13 minutes. And upstairs on 34, though Renata didn't know it yet, Preston Cale was solving a problem of his own. Preston had not gone home. This was his habit before big moments, staying, roaming, touching things on the desks of the people who worked for him. His assistant had left at midnight. His father was asleep across town, dreaming of a legacy. The deal was clean, the schedules buried, the lawyers exhausted precisely on schedule. The only itch was the cleaner, not because he believed she'd read anything, a cleaner, but because a man who builds a hidden room checks the locks twice. So at 1:20 a.m., Preston did what men like him do. He typed her name from the suspension form into a search bar. Renata Bowen Hale. For a moment, nothing interesting. Then on the second page of results, a 6-year-old article from a trade journal so niche it barely survived online. An accounting industry story, an audit dispute at a Houston firm called Dunmore and Ash. A staff accountant who had made allegations against a major client. Allegations reviewed and, in the words of the firm's statement, found to be without merit. The accountant's name appeared once in the 11th paragraph. Preston read it twice. Then he laughed, actually laughed alone on the 34th floor, because to him this wasn't a warning. It was a gift. He thought briefly of his father, of the conversation 6 months earlier when the old man had first floated retirement, had said almost offhand that he wanted to see Preston steady before he handed anything over. Steady. As if 34 years of trying to prove himself came down to one word a father used the way you describe a ladder. Kestrel wasn't supposed to be forever. It was supposed to be enough once before the company became officially his, and every dollar in it had his name stamped on the liability. One clean transfer, time to the handover, and then he'd never need it again. That was the plan he'd told himself at 2 a.m, more nights than he'd admit. The plan that made the version of himself in the mirror easier to look at. The cleaner wasn't a cleaner. She was a failed accountant with a documented history of crying fraud. If she opened her mouth about anything, ever, he wouldn't even have to argue. He'd just hand around that article. A troubled woman with a pattern of accusations. She'd wrapped her own gag around her mouth 6 years before he ever met her, and she'd delivered herself to the one building where she could be discredited fastest. At 1:56 a.m., Preston forwarded the article to Crestway's head of HR, and, after a moment of thought, to the general counsel with a message drafted to sound reluctant. FYI. Background on the staff member from tonight's incident. Concerning pattern, suggest we accelerate her termination review before the signing, so this can't become a distraction. He was proofreading it a second time when he made his real mistake, the one that would end everything, though it looked like nothing at all. He added a name to the CC line, Vivian Achebe, the CFO, because Vivian sat on the personnel committee, and because Preston wanted witnesses to his reasonableness, and because it never once occurred to him that the words Dunmore and Ash would mean anything to her. He hit send at 1:58 a.m., stretched, and went to look at the boardroom, his boardroom, one more time. 5 floors below the lobby, Renata was standing at the freight elevator with Marisol's spare badge in her hand, doing arithmetic on the risk of using it. She had a pattern in her memory and no paper. She had proof of her innocence locked inside a system she couldn't touch. She had a CFO who worked late, but was she even in the building tonight? And a supervisor who begged her to write an apology, and a receipt covered in numbers, and a cracked red pen locked in a storage closet 34 floors up. And in her pocket, her phone lit up. Amara again, 2:03 a.m. Mama Theos awake. He had the moving dream again. He wants to hear her voice. Renata looked at the elevator, looked at the phone. Some nights you can't do the brave thing and the mother thing in the same minute. She stepped back from the elevator, pressed the phone to her ear, and heard her 9-year-old's small, sleep-rough voice ask the question he always asked. Mama, are we staying? The elevator doors opened on an empty car. Held, closed without her. We're staying, baby, she said. Tell me about the ship you drew. 4 hours, 51 minutes. And the truth was still on the wrong side of a locked door. Theo talked about the ship for 11 minutes. It was a container ship, he explained, but with a swimming pool hidden between the containers so the crew wouldn't get bored. And the whole time he talked, Renata stood in a basement hallway of a building she'd been thrown out of, watching the freight elevator doors, saying, and tell me the pool part again until his voice went slow and heavy and Amara whispered, he's out. Mama, is everything... Everything's fine. Charge your phone. It's been dying all week. Both of you sleep. She hung up and stood very still. 11 minutes. She'd spent 11 of her 300 remaining minutes on a swimming pool that didn't exist. And here was the thing she knew, standing there in the vending machine light. She would spend them again. Every time. That was the whole answer to Walter's question, the one he hadn't quite asked. Why risk it? Because a 9-year-old asked, are we staying like other kids asked for dessert? And because 400 dock workers at Ellison Marine had kids who asked things too. And because 6 years of keeping her head down had not made the world 1 inch safer for any of them. The lobby. She needed the lobby, not the tower. The lobby, the public one, marble and glass, where the framed annual reports hung on the left wall like diplomas. No badge required to stand in a lobby at 2:30 in the morning, just nerve and a night guard named Deshawn, who had seen her uniform 5 nights a week for 22 months and waved her through with a nod because nobody had thought to tell the front desk that a cleaner was suspended. Preston Cale had taken her badge. He hadn't taken her face. They saw the uniform, she thought, walking past the desk with her heart hitting her ribs. For once in my life, thank God, they only saw the uniform. The frames were exactly where she dusted them every Thursday. 3 annual reports, spot-lit, open to their glossy summary pages, with the audited statements reproduced in the back in type, small enough to be decorative. Nobody read these. They were furniture. Renata stood in front of them with her grocery receipt and a pencil stub and read them the way she used to read everything at Dunmore and Ash when reading was her whole life. Year 1, vendor and advisory relationships, page 38 of the reproduction. There, Kestrel Freight Advisory, consulting services, $840,000, approved final week of the fiscal year. Year 2, different page, same shape. Kestrel Freight Advisory, $1.2 million, final week again, just under the review threshold again. She did the math twice in her head and the number sat 3% below the line that would have forced a second pair of eyes. 3%, like a truck built 1 inch shorter than the bridge. Year 3, last year, $1.9 million, same week, same 3%. And tonight, page 41 upstairs, $4.1 million, folded inside a merger. Time for a morning when everyone in the building would be watching a handshake. Renata's pencil stopped moving. 3 years of small bites, sized to duck review, always in the exhausted final week. And then the swallow he'd been rehearsing, and the sign-off signature at the bottom of 2 of those audited years. Reproduced in miniature, elegant, unmistakable, V. Achebe, Chief Financial Officer. Renata stood in the empty lobby and felt the old, cold, professional certainty settle over her like a coat she'd never given away. Vivian Achebe had signed those years, which meant one of 2 things. Either the CFO was in it, or the CFO had been used, her signature harvested in the year-end rush, the same way Renata's managing partners had been 6 years ago, and she was about to sign away her career and possibly her freedom at 7 a.m. without knowing it. One of those 2 people would want this note. The other would destroy it. Renata had bet her life on reading people exactly once before and lost. 22 months of licorice tea and thank yous by name, said bet again. 2:51 a.m. Her 30 floors up, Vivian. Achebe was not asleep, not home, and not calm. She'd come in at 1 to review the closing schedules, her habit before any signing, old auditor's superstition, and at 2:41 she finally opened the email Preston Cale had sent at 1:58. She read his reluctant, reasonable message. She opened the 6-year-old article. She read the words Dunmore and Ash and set down her tea. Because Vivian Achebe had been a partner track auditor in Houston 6 years ago, and everyone in that world had followed the Dunmore and Ash mess the way surgeons follow a malpractice trial, quietly and taking notes. And everyone in that world knew the ending Preston's article was too old to include. 18 months after the meritless allegations, the client in question had collapsed in a fraud scandal that matched the buried memo line for line. The firm never apologized. Firms don't. But in the small, careful world of people who check numbers for a living, the accountant nobody named in that article had become a kind of ghost story, the one who was right. Preston Cale had just informed his CFO in writing that the woman he'd suspended for looking at the merger contract was that ghost. Vivian sat with that for a long moment. Then she did what auditors do. She didn't call anyone. She didn't reply. She pulled the badge and document logs for the 34th floor herself. She had the access, personnel committee, and read them twice. One badge entry, a cleaning route, no prints, no scans, no copies, 90 seconds of standing still, on camera, over page 41. What did you see, Vivian thought, that was worth 90 seconds? She reached for the merger binder and turned to page 41, and the night got very quiet. At 3:12 a.m., Renata finished the note. Front and back of the grocery receipt, printed small in the block letters of a woman who'd written for federal exhibits. Both figures from page 41, the schedule reference, Kestrel's 3 prior years with amounts and timing, the 3% margin under review threshold, all 3 years, and one closing line she rewrote 4 times before letting it stand. Your signature is on FY2 and FY3. If you did not knowingly approve these, you have until 7 a.m. to become the person who caught it instead of the person who signed it. Renata Bowen Hale, formerly Dunmore and Ash. I was the memo they buried. Check me, then check him. She folded it in thirds and went to find Walter. He was in the basement office with the schedules, and he saw the folded paper in her hand and stood up so fast his chair hit the wall. No, Walter, it goes to the CFO's desk. That's all. You badge up, you set it down, you know what you're asking. His voice cracked on it. My badge on that floor tonight. After all this, they pull the logs, Renata. They always pull the logs. You of all people just told me they pull the logs. He was breathing hard. 19 years, 22 months to pension. And both his hands were shaking, and Renata understood with a tired ache that his fear wasn't smallness. It was arithmetic. The same arithmetic she'd been doing all night, with different numbers. Then don't, she said quietly. It's all right, Walter. It is not all right, none of this. He stopped, rubbed his mouth. Write the letter, he said, but the words had gone hollow, even to him, and they both heard it. That was when her phone rang. 3:54 a.m., the home number, the landline she kept for emergencies. Thio's voice, small and shaking, no sleep left in it. Mama, Amara's phone died and she's asleep so hard and I heard something outside and I called and called your cell and it went to the message. Her cell. She'd silenced it for the lobby. 3 missed calls stacked on the screen. Her son alone and scared in the dark, ringing a phone she'd shut off to chase a number. Mama, can you come home? Please, can you just come home? Renata Bowen Hale looked at the note in her hand. 400 jobs, $4 million, 6 years of buried truth folded into a grocery receipt. I'm coming home right now. Baby, stay on the phone with me. She was in the stairwell when she passed Marisol coming down with the recycling, and she didn't decide so much as move, pressed the folded receipt into her friend's hand mid-stride, phone still at her ear, and said the whole plan in 9 words. 30. Achebe's desk, under the T, don't get seen. Marisol looked at the paper, looked at Renata's face. 22 months of held doors between them. See who? Marisol said. Renata drove home through empty streets with Theo's breathing in her ear, and by the time she pulled onto Deleri Street, he was giggly with relief, and she sat on the edge of his bed until 4:40, while he explained the noise had probably been a raccoon, probably a huge one, and she said, "Probably, baby," and held his hand and did not once look at her phone. The note was out of her hands now. Everything was. At 6:15 a.m., as gray light came up over Houston and Renata stood in her kitchen in yesterday's uniform, too tired to sleep, her phone finally rang. Unknown number, downtown exchange. A woman's voice, precise, careful, impossible to read. Ms. Bowen Hale, this is Vivian Achebe, Crestway Gulf. I have your note in front of me, and I have the badge logs. And I have page 41. A pause that lasted a year. The signing is in 45 minutes. I'd like you to be in the boardroom for it. He thought he was ending her job. What he didn't know was Renata had seen this kind of fraud before and survived it. Ms. Achebe, there's a car outside your building in 10 minutes, and Ms. Bowen Hale, the precision flickered just once into something human. Your cart is already upstairs. I understand there's a pen in it you might want. The line went dead. Renata stood in her kitchen, heart slamming, and understood she still didn't know which person Vivian Achebe was, the one who'd been used or the one who was cleaning up loose ends. She'd know at 7 a.m., in the same glass room where they'd taken her badge, in front of the same table, with everyone watching. She went to wake Amara. Somebody had to hear where she was going, just in case the truth cost everything twice. The 34th floor at 6:58 a.m. did not look like the scene of a crime. It looked like a celebration. Catering trays, a photographer adjusting a light stand, lawyers from both sides arranging pens that cost more than Renata's weekly groceries. Marcus Cale Sr., the CEO, silver-haired, genuinely liked, genuinely tired, shaking hands with the Ellison Marine delegation whose lead negotiator had brought his daughter to watch because this was, he told her, how the good ones end. A reporter from a trade journal stood near the window with a recorder in her blazer pocket. And by the door, in yesterday's gray uniform, because she owned nothing that said boardroom anymore, stood Renata Bowen Hale. Preston Cale saw her at 6:59, and his face did something complicated. Confusion, then recognition, then a fast, cold calculation. And he crossed the room the way a man crosses a room to fix something before it becomes visible. "You cannot be here," he said, low, smiling for the audience behind him. "Security is going to walk you out, and this time, Preston." Vivian Achebe's voice, not loud. It didn't need to be. "She's here at my request." The room's attention turned the way a ship turns, slowly, then all at once. Vivian stood at the head of the glass table with the merger binder closed in front of her and her reading glasses in one hand, and she looked, Renata thought, like a woman who had aged 5 years since midnight and decided to spend them all in the next 10 minutes. "Marcus," Vivian said to the CEO, "before anyone signs anything, I have a disclosure obligation. It concerns page 41. You could hear the photographer stop moving. "Vivian, what?" the CEO started. "Last night, a member of our building staff was suspended for allegedly tampering with these documents." Vivian opened a folder. "I've pulled the badge logs and the document station records myself. One entry to this floor. No prints, no scans, no copies. 90 seconds on camera, standing at this table, touching nothing but a cleaning cloth." She set the log printout on the glass, facing the room. The accusation was false. I want that stated first, in front of everyone who watched her badge get taken, because the order in which we fix things matters. Proof 1. Renata felt it land in her chest like a bone being set, painful, and then suddenly, breathably right. Preston laughed, and it almost sounded easy. Okay, fine. Overzealous on my part. Apologies all around. Vivian, we have 400 people's futures waiting on this table. Can we possibly do the HR theater after the us? The second thing, Vivian said, is that she wasn't tampering. She was reading, and she read it correctly. She turned the binder around and opened it to the flagged page. The purchase adjustment on page 41 doesn't match Schedule K. The difference is $4.1 million routed to a consulting entity called Kestrel Freight Advisory. The Ellison Marine lawyers were already moving, chairs scraping, a hand reaching for the binder. A drafting error, Preston said. A schedule version issue. That's why we have a signing review. We catch it. We initial the correction. This is normal. It would be. Vivian didn't raise her voice. She laid down a second page. Except Kestrel Freight Advisory has appeared in our audited statements 3 years running. 840,000, 1.2 million, 1.9 million, each approved in the final week of the fiscal year, each sized 3% below the threshold that triggers secondary review. I checked the math at 4 o'clock this morning, Preston. 3%. All 3 years. The room had gone very still, and the trade reporter's hand had drifted casually to the recorder in her pocket. The Ellison Marine negotiator hadn't said a word yet. He was an older man, gray at the temples, the kind who'd spent 30 years learning to keep his face still in rooms like this one. But his daughter, 17, sitting against the wall with a notebook she'd brought for something else entirely, had gone rigid. Watching the numbers the way you watch a car start to slide on ice, the moment before it happens, when there's still nothing to do but see it. 400 people signed offer letters last week, the negotiator said finally, to no one in particular, to the room. Their kids are already telling other kids at school that the company's not closing. I'd like someone to explain to me how a number that size hides inside a contract my own lawyers reviewed twice. That's what I intend to find out, Vivian said, before anyone signs anything else. Vivian. The CEO's voice, quiet. An old man's voice, hearing a floor creak in his own house. Whose vendor is Kestrel? That was my question at 5 o'clock this morning. Vivian laid down a third page. Kestrel Freight Advisory was registered in Delaware 6 years ago. Sole listed officer, a Mr. Tobias Renner. She let the name sit. Marcus, you might remember Tobias. He gave the toast at Preston's engagement party. They roomed together at Rice. And here is the thing about a room full of witnesses, the same thing that had made the humiliation unbearable 11 hours earlier now ran in the opposite direction with the same current. Nobody moved to help Preston Cale. Nobody made it easy. The lawyers, the photographer, the delegation, the daughter who'd come to see how the good ones end. They watched him the way they'd watched her, and their silence, which had been a wall around her, became a wall around him. This is Preston's voice found its footing and lost it. This is a cleaner's fantasy. This is a woman with a documented history of, Vivian, I sent you the article. She's done this before. She accused a client at her old firm, and it was found meritless. It's a pattern. You did send me the article. Vivian's voice finally sharpened, 1 degree, like a blade turning. At 1:58 this morning. That was how I learned that the woman you suspended spent 11 years at Dunmore and Ash. And unlike you, Preston, I remembered how that story actually ended. Because 18 months after her firm buried her memo, that client collapsed in a fraud case that matched her memo exactly. You handed me her resume, thinking it was a weapon. She took her glasses off. It was a reference. He mistook her silence for fear once. By the time he understood who she was, it was already too late. And the worst of it, the part Preston Cale would replay for years, was that he had introduced her himself. The CEO stood up slowly. He looked at his son for a long moment, and everyone in the room understood that whatever happened next in lawyers' offices and audit committees, something between father and son, had just been signed and could never be unsigned. The signing is postponed, Marcus Cale Sr. said. Ellison Marine, you'll have full access to our books and our auditors. Preston, his voice caught, steadied, went formal, which was worse than shouting. You're relieved of your role, pending an independent review. Don't leave the building until counsel speaks with you. Then the old man turned, and the whole room turned with him to the woman in the gray uniform by the door. Ms. He didn't know her name. 11 hours after his son had taken her badge, the CEO of the company did not know her name, and to his credit, his face said he understood exactly what that meant. Bowen Hale, Renata said. Renata, Ms. Bowen Hale. My CFO tells me you found in 90 seconds what 3 law firms and 2 audit cycles missed. He gestured, helpless, at the table, the binders, the wreckage of the morning. Is there anything you want to say? And here it was. The room, the witnesses, the microphone of the moment. 6 years she had imagined a moment like this. Imagine telling a room full of suits precisely what they could do with their thresholds and their review committees, and they're found to be without merit. Renata walked to the table instead. Her cart stood in the corner where Vivian had ordered it brought up, and she reached into the side pocket without looking, the way you reach for something your hand has never forgotten, and took out the cracked red pen. She opened the binder to page 41, clicked the pen, and in front of the board, the lawyers, the reporter, and the man who'd called her a thief, she drew one clean red circle around the kestrel figure. The same slow, exact circle she'd drawn 1,000 times in another life. Just this, she said. Next time, somebody who empties your trash cans tells you a number's wrong. She capped the pen and let herself, finally, be tired in front of them. Check the number before you check the badge. The Ellison Marine negotiator's daughter started clapping. She was 17 and didn't know you weren't supposed to. Then the lawyer next to her, then the room. Renata didn't cry. She counted. Habit. And got to 4 before Vivian Achebe crossed the floor and shook her hand like a colleague. Men Endings, real ones, are slower than boardrooms. The merger closed 5 weeks later. Clean, repapered, 400 Ellison Marine jobs intact at a price that no longer had a hidden room in it. The independent review found what independent reviews find when the trail is already circled in red. Kestrel unwound, restitution negotiated, Preston Cale's name removed from the succession plan and placed into the careful hands of attorneys. His father did not protect him from it. That was the part the business press found remarkable. Renata didn't. She'd watched the old man's face when the 3rd page hit the glass. Walter Greaves knocked on Vivian Achebe's door 2 days after the signing that wasn't, hat in both hands, and told her the truth, that Renata had asked him to carry the note, and he'd refused, and he'd been wrong. And if the review needed his statement about what Preston said at the elevator that night, word for word, he remembered everyone. It didn't fix the moment in the basement. It wasn't meant to. Some apologies are just a man deciding what his last 22 months of work are going to stand for. Renata took the peppermint he offered, and they never spoke about it again, which was, between them, a complete conversation. Marisol got a commendation letter she framed in her kitchen next to a photocopy of a grocery receipt. Amara took it hardest, in the quiet way 15-year-olds take things, not with questions, but with silence, for almost a week, until one night she found Renata at the kitchen table, going through old case files Vivian's attorneys had requested, and asked, without looking up from her own homework, why her mother had never told them. Not the accusation part, the accountant part. 11 years of a whole life, Amara had never once heard mentioned at dinner. Renata thought about lying, the easy way, the tired mom way. It never came up, and didn't, because for a long time, she said, I thought if I said it out loud, I'd have to explain why it ended the way it did, and I didn't have a good answer for that yet. I do now, some of it anyway. Amara considered this the way she considered most things her mother said. turning it over once before deciding whether to let it in. "You could have told us you used to be somebody," she said finally, and there was no accusation in it, just a 15-year-old testing a fact against her whole childhood. "I was always somebody," Renata said. "I was just also tired. Those aren't the same thing, even if they look the same from the outside." Amara didn't answer that. She went back to her homework. But 2 nights later, she asked, casually over dishes, what a shell company actually was, and Renata explained it the way you'd explain anything else at a sink full of dishes, and something in the kitchen felt different after that, lighter, the way a room feels once a door that's been stuck all winter finally opens. And Renata got the thing she'd stopped letting herself want, not a title. Crestway offered one, a big one, and she asked for time. What the company gave her instead, at Vivian's insistence and with the board's unanimous vote, was funding. Attorneys, the good kind, retained to formally reopen the Dunn, Moore, and Ash matter. The sponsorship record, the quiet phone calls, the word meritless, sitting on her name like a stone on a grave. It took 4 months. In the end, with the old client's collapse on the public record, and her buried memo finally read into it, the state board issued the sentence she'd waited 6 years to hear read aloud. Reinstatement, unrestricted, record amended. They mailed her license on a Thursday. She was at the kitchen table on Delary Street when she opened it, in the noise of an ordinary evening, Amara arguing with her homework, Theo narrating a container ship across the tabletop, and she read her own name in official print, and set it down and picked it back up twice before it felt real. "Is that the paper?" Theo asked. "The one from your old job?" "That's the paper, baby." "So are you going to be an accountant now or stay at the building?" He asked it the way kids ask everything enormous, sideways, mid-game, already half thinking about the ship. And the honest answer was that she didn't know yet. Vivian had made an offer. Internal audit. Her own team, a chance to be the threshold instead of ducking under one. 2 other firms had called, the same firms that wouldn't return her calls 6 years ago, and there was a mean little satisfaction in letting them ring through to voicemail that she permitted herself exactly once each. She'd decide. That was the point. That was the whole point. For 6 years, other people had decided what her name meant. Now the deciding was hers, and she was in no hurry because a decision you're free to make slowly is a kind of wealth. "We'll see," she told him. "Either way, we're staying," Theo said, bored of the question at last moving his ship past the salt shaker. He said it the way you say a fact, not a hope, a fact. Renata got up to start dinner, and on the way, she took the cracked red pen out of her work bag and put it in the kitchen drawer. Not thrown away, not enshrined, just kept, the way you keep a thing that finished its work. For 6 years, it had been a wound she carried in a cart pocket. Now it was only what it had always actually been. Proof that she'd been right the first time, too. If this story stayed with you, if you know a woman like Renata, someone the world reads by her uniform and never by her mind, subscribe to the channel and share this with someone who needs the reminder tonight. Being overlooked is not the same as being ordinary. Some people aren't silent because they're weak. They're silent because they're carrying something heavy, and they are exactly the ones you should never make the mistake of underestimating. So before you judge the woman in the uniform, ask yourself this: what if she's the only one in the room telling the truth?